LN1, right? That's the proper terminology.
Right, Master Sergeant. Yeah, that's right. That's correct.
Okay, so where are you at right now?
So I'm actually in Coronado, California. So right, just next to San Diego. Yeah, so it's not bad.
Cool.
It's not bad.
Yeah, no, that can't be bad. That's probably one of the best places to be, right?
Yeah, I was stationed here my very first tour before I was a Legalman. I was stationed here previously, so it was nice to come back because then you kind of already know the area, so it's pretty easy to settle in.
Right. Are you? So I was reading your bio, and we'll get a little bit more into introductions, and so we can all kind of introduce ourselves and start the conversation. But I was reading in your bio that you are assigned to, is it USS Theodore Roosevelt?
The Roosevelt, right? Yeah. So I'm the leading petty officer. I'm the LPO for the Roosevelt. But as I think most people know, kind of what's going on with the ship right now. I'm currently TAD to the defense office here in San Diego. They'll be back here soon, and I'll jump back on board. But yeah, it's been pretty well documented in the media, some of the issues that have went on there. So
no way, you were
is that with the COVID things?
Yeah,
people on board, and
it was 1,100 cases. So, and then we had one of our personnel pass away. So yep. So so they kind of rotated some folks back. So I'm doing DSO defense service stuff now in the Southwest region, which is San Diego primarily, in California. So yep, just waiting for the ship to get back right now.
Wow, that is super interesting. With the whole COVID, yeah, it's definitely been in the news. It's been well documented. Yeah. We won't get into the details or your, specific view.
Probably not.
But that's interesting.
Thanks, man. Sir.
Experience. And Chief, so I know in the bio it says LNC. Do you go by LNC or do you go by Chief?
Chief is fine.
Okay, so Chief Greener. And do you work for Navy TSgt or TSgt for the Navy? Is that?
Yep. So I kind of have two roles. Our headquarters for Naval Legal Service Command and our Office of the Judge Advocate General are merged. So I have a role under OJAG, which is Knowledge Management, and a role under Navy Legal Service Command, which is Defense Paralegal Programs.
All right. So you have access because you said, "Oh yeah, I talked to our senior paralegal manager about the podcast." And is it who is it right now? Who's your senior paralegal manager?
So it's Master Chief Larkins. So there's only really 5 enlisted at headquarters for OJAG. 4 of them are legal men and 1 of them's a yeoman.
Gotcha. And you have easy access to that person.
Yeah, I mean, we talk pretty much every day. If not every day, every other day.
Nice. See, that's cool. So we've got the right people on this podcast, I think. All right. So we have Sergeant Graciano, and she's going to bring a lot of interesting perspectives from the Air Force side as well, because one of them is that she's a pipeliner, and she can speak to that, especially for those that are listening from the Navy, just to offer her perspective as to what it means to come straight into the Air Force, or her first job being a paralegal job. And she's been defense, and she was stationed at one of the busiest bases, if not the busiest base in the Air Force. And she's also currently heading a military justice as the non-commissioned officer in charge. So really interesting about this discussion. And I'm going to try for her to do most of the talking, just because I want her perspective to be out there. But I was so excited to get this together and to make sure that, we receive the Navy perspective for our community. Because every time that I've deployed, and that's another thing that I forgot to mention about Sergeant Graciano, she's deploying here next month. So she's more than likely going to be working with the Navy as well. Every time that I've deployed with the Navy. So when I went to Iraq in 2009 to 2010, we had some legal men in the office, and some of the attorneys were from the Navy as well. Actually, our commander, so who was the equivalent of a staff judge advocate of the SJA, was a reservist commander, and I think he worked for the attorney's district office or something. He was like a special attorney as well in the civilian side, and uh, my roommate was a master at arms, so he was an MA2 in Iraq, and then we had some administrative individuals as well from the Navy, and that was just in Iraq. And then when I went to Afghanistan, same thing. We had a lot of attorneys that were from the Navy, and our head uh, SJA or legal advisor to General Dunsford, because this was when General Dunsford was in Afghanistan, was Captain McCarthy. So, and I know he's like a legend in the Navy JAG community. So this is the reason why I wanted to do this, because just so we can get some more familiarization with what you do, and everything like that. So we'll start with some introductions, right? So if you just want to go ahead and tell me a little bit about yourselves, and we'll take it from there.
LN1, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, Chief. Thanks, Master Sergeant. Thanks for having me. So LN1 Bryan Fox. I came to the Navy in 2012 time frame. I came in. My previous rate or job was primarily dealt with navigation, and I was on a destroyer for 4 years, the USS Kidd. Then I what we called cross-rated or converted to Legalmen in 2016. Left school in 2017, went to Sigonella, Sicily, where I worked at the base there as the LPO of the legal shop. Is primarily staff judge advocate work and some foreign criminal jurisdiction stuff and legal assistance. From there, I was there for about 2.5 years. Then I came over to the USS Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier, CVN 71. I've been there since June. Currently deployed. I just detached for about a month and came over to the Defense Service Office West, which is based in San Diego, California. And that's where I'm currently stationed. But my primary command is the USS Theodore Roosevelt.
Awesome. So what do some of your duties entailed while you were at the Roosevelt?
So a big part of our job has to do with kind of the good order and discipline side of the ship. So we actually work, we have the makeup of the office is the department head is a judge, is a lieutenant commander. Then we'll have a mini judge who's a lieutenant. Then we'll have a DLCPO or LCPO, which is usually a chief or a senior chief. Then an LPO, which is a first class petty officer, an E6. And then you'll usually have 2 to 3 LN2s or LN3s that may advance while there. Big part of our job is doing, I believe the Air Force would call Article 15s. So for us, non-judicial punishments, kind of working that side of it to include investigations, working with security, working with the chains of command. Because at the departmental level, that's really us. We're kind of the conduit between the head of those departments, the E9s, their master chiefs, and the commanding officer through our judge. So that's a big part of it. We do a lot of legal assistance too, deployment work from notaries to power of attorneys. We'll even try to do some wills if we have the time. That's not as common, but we try to bend over backwards, especially for deploying personnel. And then we kind of work with the strike group that's a part of the ship as well that deploys with us. And again, we're the conduit for the strike group legal aspect and our commanding officer's legal needs. So that's just kind of a snapshot. But that's on top of the regular sailor stuff, right? So on a ship, you're always having to do a bunch of other stuff that's interesting in its own right. So.
All right. So we'll definitely go more in depth with all the things that happens on a ship or other things that happen on a fleet, because I'm definitely, I think we're interested about what happens under. But you mentioned that the Air Force calls it Article 15s, but you all have a really cool name for Article 15s. What is that?
So there's captain's mast, but actually captain's mast kind of comes threefold. If it's non-judicial punishment is what we actually call if you go to captain's mast and you're awarded punishment. So the punishment is tied to mast, but we have like meritorious mast, like for awards and stuff. Or you can actually request captain's mast. If you really want to talk to the CO, you can request it. It's not always granted, but you can request it.
But is it commonly referred to? So if someone's getting an Article 15, do they say, "Oh man, I got captain's mask," or like, "Oh man, I'm getting it"?
Yeah, it's there to people that aren't in the legal realm. They're used interchangeably. You'll hear NJP, but most of the time, honestly, you'll just hear, "I'm going to mast." That's what you'll hear. So, and it's usually not with a very happy face. That's for sure.
Right. See, we need to come up with something cool like that in the Air Force. I think, like,
yeah, the Army calls it UCMJ. Like, you got UCMJ'd.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. I'm like, what? You got UCMJ'd?
Nice. And that's such a wide range of things that you can get from UCMJ.
Yeah.
Well, that is interesting. But now with Space Force, we can come up with some kinds of cool stuff. You know what I mean? Like, we can call it like a lunar, session, some sort of Star Wars like reference. I don't know, but the possibilities are endless. So we can, that's right. So that we don't make it sound, just a fun spin to it. But all right, well, thank you, LN1, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to learn a lot from your perspective. So, all right, Chief Greener, what you got?
All right, so my name is Chief Greener. So I'm currently stationed here in our headquarters in DC at the Office of the Judge Advocate General and Commander Navy Legal Service Command. Joined in 2008, originally a nuclear electrician's mate, and then converted over to Legalmen in 2010. From Naval Justice School, I started our Legalmen Paralegal Education Program, which is our mandatory associate's degree that we're required to get as a paralegal. And then from that in-resident semester, I departed and went to the USS George Washington, CVN 73, forward deployed in Yokosuka, Japan. I spent 3 years there, then continued back to the States and was stationed at Region Legal Service Office Mid-Atlantic in Norfolk, where I served in the trial department, and then later at the Staff Judge Advocate's Office for the Navy region for the Mid-Atlantic area. From there, I came up here to headquarters.
All right, nice. And there is an interesting fact about you as well, as far as your interaction with the Air Force and with the Air Force JAG School, right?
Yep. About 2 years ago, 2018, I actually went through your law office manager's course down there at Maxwell Air Force Base. Pretty awesome course. Got to hear from your senior paralegal manager and your JAG and DJAG, and met a lot of great airmen that you guys have within your ranks.
Awesome. So I know you're familiar. When we were talking on the phone, you were throwing all these, you're familiar with AFLOA and all these terms that I'm like, whoa. I'm not just talking with a regular, just a regular chief. He knows his business. He knows his Air Force lingo.
Yeah, it's definitely a different take on things, but we have a lot of similarities. We just call them different things.
Right. And Sergeant Graciano, if you please just want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in the Air Force so far.
Sure. So I'm Technical Sergeant Amanda Graciano. I joined the Air Force in 2012. When I came into the Air Force, I was actually an open general contract, meaning I didn't have a job coming in. One of the options that I had when I was doing my job choice was paralegal. And then a little bit about our selection process. So I was brought into our career advisement section of the BMT processing center. And they were like, so you had paralegal on your selections. There's an interview process and a biography you have to do and a typing test. If you do the interview process, you're foregoing all your other choices. So if you don't get picked, you're going to get whatever, is left over. But if you do get picked, you'll get picked. So I was like, it was a big decision for me then, because I didn't know if I wanted to do paralegal. But I decided to go ahead and go forward with the interview process. It was a lot easier than I thought. I grew up military, so I kind of understood a little bit of the lingo and things they were asking me. Fortunately enough, I got picked. So I went to tech school, which that's what we call a technical training, the paralegal apprentice course. It's the first course we take in our, first training we have to become a paralegal in the Air Force. So every paralegal in the Air Force will go through this course. It's a 16-week course. When I went through it, it was an 8-week course. And then my first base I was stationed at was the Lackland Base Legal Office. I was there for a little over 2.5 years before I got picked up to become a defense paralegal. And then I just PCA'd, so I moved over into the defense office at Lackland and was there for 3.5 years. It's a lot longer than I was supposed to, but that's the way it was. And then I PCS'd here to Shaw Air Force Base, where I'm at currently, here in South Carolina. I started out as the non-commissioned officer in charge of adverse actions, which is non-judicial punishments, demotions, LORs, that type of administrative paperwork, and discharges. And then I moved into the NCIC of military justice position early last year, which I'm doing now and then I'll deploy next month. So been in a little over 8 years, only been a paralegal. So this is all I know. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you also for joining us in this call. Look forward to the perspective as well. So let's get started with one of the main questions that we have is, how does one become a Navy legalman?
So the first step to become a legalman is you actually have to already be in the Navy. So we don't recruit from the civilian population like the other services do. And that's a bit of a leftover from our creation back in the 70s. Originally, our rating is another word for job title. Our rating, the legalman rating, was created as a position requiring E5 and above. And then later on, they lowered it down to E4. Today, we have openings or conversion opportunities, rather, for personnel that are E3 and above. So E3, E4, E5, and then E6 is only on a case-by-case basis. We don't allow conversions for anybody E7 and above into our rating. But essentially what that makes us do as a community is kind of traces back to diversity. So as you may know, in the military, diversity is one of the strengthening characteristics of our force. And having a team that can contribute in different ways based on their different cultures or background, that helps to create a more cohesive and lethal team. So this kind of makes us take it one step further by requiring a diversity of experience on the enlisted side. So that's one of the advantages, since we kind of operate on a peer side model for legal services. There's not a lot of opportunity for judge advocates to be in a unit that goes to sea. We only have a handful of billets that are seagoing billets for our judge advocates. Whereas the enlisted, chances are they've either gone to sea or been with an aviation squadron or construction battalion, or even embedded with Marines for those corpsmen that we have. So this helps us bring in that diversity of the fleet institutional knowledge, and it's kind of most helpful in fixing one of our obvious flaws of not being able to go out to sea with the judge advocates. So essentially, that's the start of it. So once somebody's decided to become a legalman, there are some prerequisites, just like your career field has. Some of our prerequisites basically revolve around education. So they have to complete a certain amount of computer-based training, basically brings them on par with a yeoman, which is our administrative clerk. Then there is a requirement for English 101 and 102 for college level English, but it is waivable if somebody just had not had the opportunity to achieve that education prior to converting. After they've completed all the prerequisites and minimum ASVAB requirements, then they're screened by a selection board, which basically they'll ask them questions about their character, their work ethic, etc., similar to the conversion boards that you or retraining boards that your community does. Once that board is concluded, they make a recommendation, which comes up here to the senior enlisted advisor to the JAC. She makes her recommendation, and that's forwarded to Navy Personnel Command. After that, if they're approved, then they'll get orders to Naval Justice School and continue.
That seems extensive, huh?
A lot of information.
You gotta like really want to do it to go through the entire process to become a paralegal in the Navy.
Yes, you do. I mean, when you get somebody that comes into your office and says they want to be a legalman, as they go through the process, you see how motivated they are. And that's the kind of person we want in our community, is somebody that's truly motivated to get what they want and are willing to do what is required to do it. One of the things we usually notice, especially on our ship units or ship-based units, is if they have an opportunity to get a warfare device, which on our uniforms, essentially it's something like that. It's similar to what you guys wear on your uniform, but we have surface, aviation, submarine warfare. But if they have one of those pins, or every pin that they've had the opportunity to get, that's kind of indicative that they're very motivated and they're willing to do what it takes.
Well, we have, as far as us wanting to become paralegals, it used to be the same as far as it had to be a retrainee, but then it changed, and I believe it changed around 2002, 2003. I don't have the full of data. Do you know Sergeant Graciano? No, like of
I think 2004
2004.
took a full pipeline class.
Right. So, but for our retrainees, it works a little bit different, because it's either in their 36-month window, or if they sign for 4 years for a 4-year enlistment, or in their 48-month or 56-month if they sign for 6 years. So they're essentially staff sergeants by that time. So I'm a little bit curious about if you're saying that you're allowing essentially petty officer third class now to cross into, switch ratings, or then how soon can they apply then to be a legal man?
I mean, in my experience, I've seen people that were, so we have had as juniors E3 or just barely made E4. One of actually the people I converted was just barely made E4 before they left for justice school. But you can convert as early as being in the Navy for a year or 2 or 3 years. Myself personally, I converted at the 3-year mark. How about you, LN1?
Yeah, Chief. So I was actually at about 4 years, like 3.5 years, and and because the size of the ship that I was on, I didn't even not all of our surface platforms, especially, have legalmen, as Chief kind of alluded to before. There's not a legalman, there's not a billet on every ship for every job. So legalman's one of those things that's usually just on the bigger ships. So I didn't really have a lot of knowledge about it. I had to look into it. And yeah, like Tech Sergeant said, like you got to be a little motivated to get to get your packet together, because it's not a whole lot different than if you apply for like an officer package or an officer program. It's really not that different. There's a lot of background that goes into it. So and I just add that a lot of people, if they do get selected, or prior to getting selected, they'll do what we call OJT, so on job training. And that's one of the great parts of this rate, is that there's a lot of peer level review, right? So if somebody like, hey, I want to do this, I want to convert, and they're, given the opportunity to come train in a legal shop, especially on a ship, you'll see this a lot. That leading petty officer, that E6 that's in charge of that shop, is going to have a big voice when they go up to the conversion board about like, hey, I think this person could really work out. I think they could succeed. Or, hey, to be truthful with you, there's some areas they need to work on. And that might be something you want to bring up their plan in the conversion board. So one of the good things about our community, while it is small, I think at the very top, they have pretty open ears about what the more junior person will have to say about how we work our conversion process, which has been great because not many jobs in the military allow for that. So
yeah, so we have something like very similar. So anybody, we call it cross training. So anybody that is already, of course, looking to cross train into becoming a paralegal, we have the interview process and they do the typing test, but we also have a 10-day observation period they're required to do. So they'll actually come into the office. They'll schedule this up. They're here. This is their alternate duty location. And we try to involve them as much as possible. We're a little restricted because we have OJT tasks we're required to be signed off on before we can perform certain duties within the office. So we're a little restricted on what they can actually do. But for the most part, it's for them to, observe our job, see if it's something we really do, and us to get to know them to make our recommendation. So they'll actually do an interview with our statute advocate and then our law office superintendent, who is our E7, E8 in our office. And then they will make their recommendation to the Air Force Personnel Center, or I think does it go up to MAGCOM before? I don't know. Do you know, Sergeant Perez?
I believe it does. So I just got back to the career field myself in this role. So, but I believe it does. It goes up to the MAGCOM.
Yeah, it goes up to another reviewing authority, and then they'll make their decision on whether or not they would like the person to cross-train into the career field. A lot of times, most of the people that we're getting are people being forced to retrain out of their jobs. So their position either has too many personnel in it, they need more of another rank, so they have too much of that rank, and they haven't made another rank to either stay. So a lot of times they're like, I have no idea what you guys do. I don't even know if this is something I want to do. Sometimes people just kind of get thrown in this. So that observation period is a good buffer time for us to kind of weed out the ones that may not be that good of a fit, or kind of let others see that, oh, wow, this is something that I really am interested in and I'd like to do. So a little similar, but not that similar.
Yeah, and I have some other questions about your process. So one is there any discussion about it being open to brand new sailors, right? People just joining the Navy. And then second, because you mentioned LN1, that you had to essentially do the research yourself that you didn't even know about the legal career field. So how is it advertised then throughout the Navy?
So, Chief, if you don't mind, I'll take the second part if you want to take the first part. To your question about like how I found out about it was honestly through a friend of mine, a shipmate of mine, that was also interested in it. And I kind of looked at what it was in law school. Was something I'd looked at. I'd taken the LSATs. I'd done that kind of thing. But I also liked kind of the interaction I had in my enlisted life. So Ellen was a good fit for me. But yeah, so I had to work with essentially what we'd call, well, it's an NC, so we'd call it a Navy career counselor, or a counselor, career counselor. And they kind of walked me through the process, but I was very much like, hey, what's the instruction? Get in the instruction. Hey, this is what I need to do. And what, as long as you have access to your record, it's not difficult. But what you will see sometimes is people, it's kind of gets stuck in the weeds a little bit about what's actually required. So that's why for us, it's always good to work with a legal shop, which I ended up doing. I went to Real Southwest to the trial shop at the time and spoke with the chief there. And he kind of pointed me like, yeah, this is the advice you got, but here's really the best way to do it. And he was incredibly helpful. And everyone in the community is. If you come and you're seriously interested in doing it, they'll get you where you need to go. or certainly show you the right direction to head anyway. So, but yeah, for me, it was just research based, and then, hey, my enlistment's almost up. Do I want to stay in the Navy? Yes, I want to stay in the Navy. Do I want to keep doing the job I'm doing? Maybe, but are there any are there other options that I could look at? And Legalmen was certainly one of them, and that's what I chose to go with. So, and I got picked up.
Yeah, so on your first question of whether or not there's any talk about opening it up to just recruit into it. I mean, we're always looking to improve, and we're always evaluating how we're doing our recruiting process. Right now, we're hitting our recruiting numbers pretty well. A year ago now, not so much, but we're always looking at our process. Back when we were first created, like I said, we started at E5 and above, and then slowly we realized we had a need for some junior sailors in our ranks, kind of a task to talent, if you will. If you have too senior of people doing junior level tasks, it kind of hurts the morale. So there is some added benefit to having more junior folks, because we get to keep them a little bit longer too. So if we were to have somebody come in as an E1 to E3, or even convert earlier in their career, then we would be able to keep them a little bit longer. So there are benefits to it. There's also concerns as well, as far as if you're getting somebody straight out of civilian life, you don't really know how they're going to handle military life, and what they're going to be like in that type of environment. So there are some pros and cons, but the door's never shut until somebody actually says no. As far as that decision, which it hasn't happened yet. It's always a point of conversation of whether or not we're doing it right. As far as advertising out there, some of the ships, the smaller ships like LN1 mentioned, destroyers and cruisers and whatnot, there's really not a legal presence on board. There's a legal officer who's usually a line officer who happened to have training from our Naval Justice School on legal officer duties. It's really a collateral duty. It's not their primary duty, and it usually rotates among junior officers. So making those enlisted personnel aware in those types of units, as well as submarine and some squadrons, that we exist is kind of hard. So we do some outreach events, usually regionally, and some of them we've hosted online as well, to get the word out about our community. For example, like me, when I converted, I was in Charleston, South Carolina, and there are 2 LN1s on the base, but they weren't in my unit. And the only reason I discovered the Legalmen community when I was deciding what I wanted to convert to was my chief at the time happened to be dating LN1. And so when she would come into the office, she'd say who she was, and I was like, LN, what is that? And then she'd start telling me about it. I'm like, I was thinking between going Master at Arms and Yeoman, Master at Arms being military police and Yeoman being administrative. And then I realized Legalmen existed, and I'm like, that's what I want to do. That's exactly what I want to do. And ever since, I've been happy, haven't looked back.
Awesome. Yeah, we've just reached a huge milestone in the Air Force with the recruiting part, and with allowing or recruiting members from being civilian and already coming in with a guaranteed job. So, it's come a long way from 17 years ago. So we'll see, we'll see how that goes. It's definitely going to be interesting, but there's still going to be an interview process with that. So there's still a process. So it's not like, the recruiter, hey, here's this job available. Here you go. You're now a paralegal. So there's going to be some requirements that they're going to have to go to their nearest Air Force base and interview with the law office superintendent still, or equivalent, to get that job. So, okay, so I think we are good to go on how you become a legalman in the Navy. So interesting process. Do you have any questions for us as far any additional questions as far as how the process?
I don't. LN1, do you? I think you're on mute, LN1.
All right, that'll probably work better then.
All right.
Yeah, I don't. It sounds very similar to kind of the nuts and bolts in it aren't that different, with the exception, obviously, when you come in. So yeah, it's not, the interview process doesn't seem all that different.
Yeah. I just think like just something you mentioned about the experience level is something that you guys look for when they're, changing over to Legalmen, is like, being on ships before and kind of just having that experience. One of the bad reps that us pipelines paralegals get is that we don't have Air Force experience. Which I think the complete opposite. I might be biased, I probably am, but I think I actually get a lot different experience because I get to see all of our mission sets from an outside perspective. Like, I may not be in there doing the day-to-day job, but because we work with so many different commanders and units, we really get to learn, those different like aspects of the Air Force. But yeah, like a lot of the older paralegals who cross trained into, they're like, yeah, but you don't have Air Force life experience. You don't. I'm like, well, does anybody when they first come into any job? Nobody does. Nobody has Air Force experience. Why is our job any different? But yeah, that's just one of the bad reps that we get as pipeliners, is we don't have life experience in the Air Force.
Yeah, I can certainly see it. I mean, when I joined or converted to Legalmen, yeah, I'd been in for 3 years, but I really hadn't been anywhere. I'd been to school and I was temporarily assigned to our personnel support detachment. So I had a little bit of exposure. But I mean, even then, I didn't really, I didn't know how to put out a fire on a ship. I didn't know how to navigate a ship. If somebody told me, that's how life works, I wouldn't know any different. But at the same time, like, when I got to my first unit, like my chief and my judge advocates were really able to kind of like mold what was important and I needed to know to help them out. So I can see like the pros and cons to both. I think it's something that we should always look into.
Absolutely. So good. So the next question that I have is, where does this training take place? So how, okay, so now you go through this board and you tell them why you're such a great fit to be a legal man, and they say, all right, there you go, you're going to be a legal man. Now what happens?
So our Legalman Accession course is held at Naval Justice School in Newport, Rhode Island. It's about 11 weeks long, but you do receive permanent change of station orders to go there because immediately upon graduation of the Legalman Accessions course, you do 1 semester in resident with Roger Williams University towards your associate's degree. So we do have a mandatory degree requirement for all of our personnel within a few years of converting over. And part of that degree requirement is you have to have in-resident classes completed for the university to award the degree. So they do that in Newport, Rhode Island right after their initial training. So it ends up being that you're at Justice School for about 8 months, depending on which part of the year you move into.
That seems like such an investment for the Navy. Like, not that it's negative. I didn't want that to sound negative, but I feel they put a lot into your guys' education, which I think the Air Force does for us too. But a lot of our educational courses are Air Force run. They're run by our JAG school, so that's pretty awesome.
Right. Yeah. One of the big advantages of that school too is that, so it's kind of broken up into thirds, right? So the first piece is kind of the enlisted, the chiefs, and there's also Marines there, which is helpful, right? So you kind of get that interaction as well. So you get, the chiefs and senior enlisted folks really teaching you kind of the MILJUS kind of SGA basics. Then you go into some of the college level courses with attorneys, both Marine and Navy. Then you go to, as Chief was talking about, the big Roger Williams piece, is normally instructed by judges that work there in Providence or wherever, and you'll go to court a few times. You'll see all that kind of stuff. So what's nice about it is it's not just military centric. You get kind of a broader perspective, or at least a bit broader perspective of what a paralegal would do outside of the military, which in what would a judge expect of a paralegal if you worked for a judge, a civilian judge. So that's, the Navy definitely invests quite a bit. That's why I think the conversion process is so involved, and maybe part of the reason why we're as small as we are, because to get there, they want to make sure that, you're the right person for the job. So, but yeah, it's an investment.
Like setting you all up if it's something that you aspire to do, like outside of the military, like if you don't, finish out your contract even in the Navy, but you kind of have like that background and that degree to help you out, and it like really does set you up for success on the civilian side. So that's pretty awesome. Now it totally goes hand in hand with your selection process. Now it makes a lot more sense. That's cool.
Yep, and we get our money's worth out of it too. We do require a service obligation to 36 months after you go to school. So we try and get our return on investment, and for the most part, people stay in the rating and continue on to 20, or just shy of 20, whatever their own life circumstances warrant. Yeah.
Do you guys get a bonus?
We don't. So at the moment, we don't really have a need for a retention bonus because of our turnover rate. There was talk in the comprehensive review of the uniform legal services communities for the Navy Marine Corps of having a performance-based bonus type thing, or incentive pay of some sort. But at the moment, we don't have one.
Okay. So you do, new legal man goes to training, goes to the Naval Justice School in Rhode Island, and then they go to Rogers Williams University and take those courses as well. And you don't leave out of there with a degree, with an associate's, or do you?
Most people don't. Some people have college completed before the Navy, or maybe as part of their prior rating, where they get really close and they only have to do one or two more classes. That's kind of how my situation was. I only had 3 more classes I needed to take after I left Roger Williams. But because I went to a ship that was particularly undermanned, I didn't complete it right away. It took me a little bit longer to do, but still within the time frame, of course. But it just depends on the individual and how much education they've already done.
Wow. So you could potentially go to what we call tech school, do your 8 months, and before you even go to your first assignment, to go there with an associate's degree in paralegal studies.
Yep, that's quite possible.
Yep, there's a lot of people in the class that I was in that I actually already had bachelor's degrees, and that because they had that previous experience, or like Chief said, their previous rate school, they got to roll some of those credits in together, and they were done with it. The day they left that, they had their additional associates off to their first command. So,
Gotcha. Sergeant Graciano, did you want to kind of talk about how our CCAF process goes in our tech school as well?
Sure. So we don't have like a mandatory associates program, but we have an Air Force wide CCAF program. It's the community college of the Air Force. So much it allows airmen to, collaborate with different schools. You can pretty much go wherever you want. And then the Air Force will award you an associate's degree in your career field specialty after you take certain courses and then obtain all the credits. So for the paralegal career field, we have required credits that we get out of basic training. So like physical education, just general military education, and then our paralegal apprentice course, which is our first level of training, that gives us our paralegal basic general knowledge credits. And then when we are becoming 7-level paralegals, so once you make E5, you go back to school to get 7 levels. So we have skill levels 3, 5, 7, and 9. So we actually go back to school for 8 more weeks. And then there are certain credits at 7-level school that we're required to get for our degree program. And then on top of that, you have English, speech, all of those other credits that you'd get from a different, community college, university, wherever you plan to go that you do. And then we have a system that tracks all of that for us. And then once you complete your credits, you get your degree. So mine's right there. But yeah, so it's pretty cool. It's not mandatory. It's completely optional. It's something that the Air Force does look for when you're promoting, especially into those senior NCO ranks, because they want to see that you have, whole airman concept. You're doing more than just coming to work and doing your job. So, yeah.
Right. It is now mandatory for, I believe, E8 and E9. You have to have your community college of the Air Force degree in your specialty. So you got to have that, or you don't have to have that specifically. You can have that or an associate's degree. So it doesn't have to be necessarily. But if you have an associate's degree, you're more than likely already going to qualify to get the CCAF as well. So let's talk about now upgrade training real quick. So Legalmen, and then 8 months, and now you go into your first assignment. Then how does that look like? Because we have what we call career development courses. So they are like we call CDCs, and they're books that we have to study. It's like we have 4 volumes, and it's 1 volume per month that you have to essentially pass. And one is in military justice, another one in general law, another one it's in like just the judge advocate general court in general in claims. So what does that look like for the Navy?
LN1, did you want to start this one?
You can go ahead, Chief. I'll jump on after.
So we don't necessarily have a system that's really very similar to yours. So we kind of put an emphasis on our legalmen being able to operate independently very early on. Just primarily that's just how the Navy's designed. I mean, if you go and you're deployed on a ship, and if you aren't aware of your job or don't know how to do your job, and the internet is cut off due to whatever operational requirements, you have no ability to reach back to anybody. So the system we have in place is called Personnel Qualification Standards, and it covers our entire rating. So it goes into administrative law, legal assistance, military justice, which both non-judicial punishment and courts martial, and then some host of other issues like ethics. But that's an entire book. It's pretty thick and arduous to go through, but we require it for all of our personnel under 5 years in the rating. We do have some career milestone courses that are required. So we have a mid-level legalman course, which is usually completed at the LN2 or E5 range, sometimes E6s, depending on when they convert it, either at the latter end of their first tour or beginning to middle of their second tour. After that course, we do have the senior LN course, which is for all personnel that were selected for Chief Petty Officer. And that's another career milestone. And then we do have 2 other specialty courses for legalmen that are assigned to military justice litigation billets. So that's our paralegal litigation support course, which is a pretty basic course. It just focuses on military justice and the courts martial process and how we can best serve our attorneys as paralegals. And then we have a litigation law office managers course, which is designed for E7 and above who are assigned to litigation billets as well. But primary ability or evaluation of the ability of an individual legalman is usually done by the supervising attorney or paralegal that works with them through individual tasks and their ability to complete those tasks. It's not necessarily signed off in a master system, if you will, aside from the PQS. LN1?
Yeah, Chief. Yeah, so because we have all these naval justice schools, so we have a few of them right across the country, but kind of the home base is Newport, Rhode Island. But there's other. The JAG Corps is really good about, especially with on the enlisted side, of getting people that have the time and commands that'll support it into other courses. So you can even do there's a staff judge advocate course that you can take, time permitting, and they're pretty. Commands are usually supportive of that because we're such a small rate and there's not a ton of us. Sometimes you have to sit down with your leadership and say we call it a learning and development roadmap. It's the acronym's ladder. So I don't know if I don't know if the Air Force has those or not. It's essentially like your training roadmap for how you get to the next pay grade. So for us, it's very detailed about what the expectation is. Like if you're an E5, this is what you should be doing. If you're an E6 and you want to make E7, this is what you need to be doing. These are the qualifications and maybe previous experiences that we're going to require of you, right? That's incredibly helpful because I know most of our senior leaderships, they'll say that gives you the answer to the test right there. If you want to advance and you want to be trained how you're supposed to be trained, look at that ladder and then follow up and make sure that expectation is being met. So it's pretty laid out. The career path is fairly laid out, which most people who are going to stay in for 20 years greatly appreciate because that's not always true.
So interesting. It's like a whole different world. I feel like in the Air Force, I mean, your job performance and all that, which is what they're trying to highlight and move to these days, is your job performance outweighing your ability to take a test on Air Force knowledge. So now our enlisted ratings weigh more than, your test scores would, when before it was vice versa, your test scores. So you take a job knowledge test and then an Air Force knowledge test. And before, those two tests combined would outweigh your enlisted performance reports, which obviously have all the bullets that, this is what I did in the last year. This is all the great things I've done. But now they've changed it. So, and we have different promotion ratings and stuff. So I would say we don't really actually have anything that, lays it out. Like this is we have the enlisted course structure that tells us what each rank, what you're expected to do. But for the most part, it really goes into, studying for your test and doing well at your job and working hard to get good promotion ratings to move to the next rank. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we do the tests too. Yeah, so we do the advancement exams and all that, and there's points from your evals, like you were talking about your work performance. So all that kind of gets blended together. But yeah, up until after if you promote to E7, after that you're not having to take exams anymore, obviously. But yeah, before that, like E6s every year. Every time you're about to take an advancement exam, it's a big deal, right? It's a big deal for everybody.
Too. But they just did away with testing for E7 and up. So
yeah, same here. They did. Yeah. I don't know the last time they did it for us. Actually, Chief might remember, but if they ever,
I don't think we ever have, because when the senior chief grade was created, there wasn't a test for it. It was just a board. So yeah, I don't think we've ever had that for E8 and 9 that I am aware of. But one of the weird things about our rate, which is it's ironic because this situation never arises, but we have no E4 exam because there's no such thing as an E3 LN. So we're one of the only communities that doesn't have an E4 exam. So there's only an exam for E5 and E6 and E7. But it is just kind of weird. Like, what if a legalman just happened to get reduced? It wasn't a big deal. It was enough of them to go to the captain's mast. But how would they ever make E4 again? And we've never had to run into that situation. But it's just kind of one of those ironic things to think about. What if?
Yeah.
Well,
we don't test for E4, so.
Oh yeah, no, we don't.
It's just a time and service requirement you have to meet, and obviously you can't get in trouble and all that. But It's like you're on probation for 2.5 years until you get E4. So.
Sure, there's a lot of people in the Navy that wish there was just no
Yeah.
E4 exam.
There is a
Some of
large
them, it's just
contingent
so
that would
hard for
hope
them
for
to
that.
make it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Do you guys open up your courses to other sister services?
We do. There's a lot of our courses, like for example, our paralegal litigation support course. When I first started helping with that course, we had quite a few Air Force personnel come over. And that's actually when I went out to your law office managers course. We're kind of, taking turns who sends who. Uh, so we do have some courses that are open. It's basically, built off the availability of the school and the needs of the Navy at the moment as well. But there is opportunities there. And our senior enlisted advisor shares those routinely with the senior enlisted advisors for all the other services as well. Same with our justice school. They talk to your AFJAG schools.
Oh, cool. I'm gonna keep that in my goals. Go
Right.
to the Navy
That's
course.
right. Do you have how many naval justice schools do you have?
So we have Newport, which is our headquarters. We have a detachment in San Diego, a detachment in Norfolk, and then a branch office in Charlottesville at the Army JAG School, which really does a lot of the CLAMO stuff, operational law, lessons learned, that type of stuff.
Okay, we have the one at Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama.
I really
Which I
am
think
jealous
is,
of that building.
I don't know. I feel like that's an Air Force thing. We like to keep, traditional alive, and you got one way into the Air Force if you're enlisted. You got one way into the JAG Corps. I think it's cool though because it's almost like a reunion. Like every time you go back for a course, because you usually like people kind of like make it through the ranks in different positions at the same time. Some don't. But so when you go back for courses, someone who you would have gone to like your tech school 6 years ago, you're like, hey, what's up? I haven't seen you in 6 years, So it's like a reunion every time. It's pretty awesome. And you get to meet like other people around the JAG Corps, sister services if they go, and then just like if you're PCSing, your new bosses, new paralegals. It's pretty cool. So
Yeah, you guys definitely have a much larger community than we do, but I remember when I was there, like everybody knew each other. I was like, man, we're only like 500 something strong in the Legalmen, and there's still Legalmen that I meet, and I'm like, hi, nice to meet you. Like, where have you been?
That's right.
I think because we have so many courses and we're just at the school so often that, yeah.
That's what it is. No, absolutely. So I kind of want to talk about some of the specific tasks that we do, right? I want to touch on paralegal utilization because I want to know what things are you really, are you doing that compared to what an attorney work product would be, right? So, and I'm talking about maybe, proof analysis, how much case research do you do? How much involvement do you have in that process as far as who gets, how much of a say do paralegals have in the justice in those decisions that are being made? And also because we have a program that generates, where we put Article 15s, NJP, we do court martials. But what kind of program do you have? Do you have a program that generates NJPs or a program that generates the charge sheet or something like that?
So this is where we get jealous of the Air Force. So we do everything by hand.
Oh,
I mean,
no.
not literally by hand. We're not writing these things out with pencil and paper.
A typewriter.
But our typewriters, we still have typewriters out there. They come in handy for referrals. But we don't have any magical system that creates the charge for us. We write every charge by hand from directly out of the MCM or the bench book every time. And every time it's on a new report sheet or new charge sheet. There's nothing that, retrieves the pay information or anything like that for us. We have to go to personnel to get it. So you guys do have a lot of efficiencies when it comes to that process. Um, but yeah, we do everything by hand. As far as paralegal utilization, um, so I joke, and this isn't 100% accurate, but it fits most situations. A paralegal can do everything an attorney can, except for the 3 A's: argue, advise, and make agreement.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so
I like that.
with
I'm
the
gonna write that
appropriate
down.
supervision, like paralegal, like depending on their level of experience, should be able to do everything that the attorney can. And they did go to law school to learn their role for a solid 3 years, and we only spent 8 months at justice school. Um, but through like actively communicating with the attorney as far as like, hey, I don't know how to do this, or can you explain this legal concept to me? We do learn quite a bit from them on the job, and they're really able to mold, how we think in our particular billets. Most of, our billet structure is kind of different from the Air Force. So 55% of our rate is, or our community in general, is with the fleet in some capacity, whether they're at a staff command, embedded on a ship, or otherwise. Only 45% of our community is within Navy Legal Service Command, which is where our trial, defense, legal assistance offices are. And we also have a unit called Command Services, which isn't necessarily any one person's SJA. It's basically if a command does not have an SJA, they only have a legal officer, they would call Command Services for help. But within there, they have the SJA for the region and the SJA for each of the installations. But paralegals are really empowered to do, quite a bit in our community, and we're leaned on quite a bit by our attorneys to do so. Um, yeah, I mean, we don't have, at the end of the day, the decision as to which way a case goes doesn't lie with us, and it rarely lies with the attorney. It's really, embedded in the command structure. But our point of view is pretty important. There's one case in particular that I remember because it was when I was on a ship, that the paralegal on the case actually pointed out the impossibility of the government's argument of you could get from point A on the front of the ship to point B on the back of the ship within 5 minutes or so. Every hour on the hour on a ship, story time. Every hour on the hour on the ship, a bell will ring over the intercom system. It happens on the half hour as well. So his alibi had said, hey, the 8 o'clock bell went off and he was in the front of the ship. And the incident for sure happened at 8:05. But there was no way for them to get from the front of an aircraft carrier to the back of an aircraft carrier at a 5-deck difference, so 5 ladder wells, within 5 minutes. An aircraft carrier is about 1,000 feet long, and pretty tight spaces to navigate through. And none of the judge advocates had realized this. The defense counsel hadn't realized this. The trial counsel hadn't realized it. None of us on ship staff had realized it, because it was just a minute detail. But the paralegal on the defense team was able to speak up and tell their attorney, like, hey, I noticed this, and it might be pretty important. And that's what broke the case. LN1?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has a lot to do with your relationship with your judge advocates, right? So if you like to speak up, I think you'll do well as long as you bring knowledge to the table and you bring like your version of events in a well communicated way. I think most of the judges or judge advocates I've worked with or for have usually respected the opinion as long as it comes with some sort of suggestion or a path to why you think that way. So your analysis, I guess, is probably the best way to put it. And I'm not sure how the Air Force works. I'm sure it's very similar to ours, and as far as when attorneys come in, right? So they don't go through a lot of the process. And I know Tech Sergeant, she had talked about, you all have a pipeline, and that's been effective on the Air Force side. For us, as Chief said earlier, that one of our big things that we've got is the fleet experience for us, specifically ones when it comes to ship stuff. Because a lot of the attorneys, right, they went bachelor's and they went to law school, or they, worked somewhere else, then finally went to law school. And then they might even have been an attorney out in the civilian world. And like, yeah, I want to go in the military. So then they come in, they do a little bit of training, right, to kind of gear them up to put a uniform on. But their experience is not just, what's firefighting a ship look like, but like, am I a naval officer first, or am I a JAG first, right? The right answer is obviously you're a naval officer first, ma'am, sir. Like that's not always easy for judge advocates to understand. So the enlisted side, we bring. I mean, it might sound small, but it's a big thing. Like Chief said, how does this actually work? Are we going to charge this? Okay, is it feasible that this event occurred in this way? No, why? Okay, they'll listen to you as long as you put your analysis in, and you have to think like an attorney. And I think good attorneys first train you on that and then expect it. And they hold the bar pretty high. So I've always had a pretty open door policy relationship with most of any of the senior leadership that I've worked with. And some of the lower ranking folks that I've, have had in shops that I've ran, I've always encouraged that as well. I think they encourage it at NJS, at Justice School. Like if you know that you're correct and you have analysis to back you up, then speak up. Because if your LN2, your E5 isn't willing to speak up and set things straight, and they hold on to that, you're going to be a weaker shot for it and have less success in your cases for it. So that's pushed pretty heavily.
Yeah, I'd always struggled with articulating why I thought a certain way. I'm not afraid to speak my mind. That's for sure. But trying to convince my attorney why was always kind of difficult for me. But I did go to, like I said, the law office management course, and we had the opportunity there to hear from your TJAG, and he was talking about how staff judge advocates really earn the right to make a recommendation. And he basically gave this list, and I'll read it back to you because it's really simple, and it just kind of opened my eyes, because it's really the same thing we should be able to do to our attorneys. But you give the facts about the case, right? You give the range of options, and then the legal rationale for each of those options. And then you can make your recommendation. Once they've heard all of the other three, then you've built up that rapport with them to be able to have that right to make a recommendation. And without hearing the facts or any of the legal rationale first, if you just blurt out your recommendation and they don't know why you're making that recommendation, they're never going to believe you, or they're just going to go with their gut instinct of what they learned at legal officer course or senior officer leadership course. So that kind of goes hand in hand with how we deal with our attorneys. Is we should be doing the same thing they're trying to do for their commanders, because that's the only way that they'll really understand how we're thinking the way we are and why.
No, yeah, it's I'd say it's pretty similar in the Air Force. We do have a lot of young paralegals. We also have a lot of young JAGs. So I'm finally getting to the point to where JAGs are younger than me now coming in. So over my time, I've seen that, these young JAGs really rely heavily on, the experienced paralegals in the office. Maybe mostly because we tend to stay at bases longer than the JAGs will. Our JAGs leave the office every 2 years. They're rotating in and rotating out. So we tend to keep a pretty young crew around quite often, minus, your section chiefs. They might have a little bit more experience, but it really does go hand in hand with your chief of military justice and your NCIC of military justice to help out these younger new JAGs. Even some of the experienced JAGs don't have as much experience as some paralegals will, just depending on, your experience and your time in. We're really justice heavy in the Air Force. We tell everybody military justice is job one. So that's what we focus on as far as training. We do have training in, gen law. There's some ops law stuff. It's just not a lot of stuff that we see often. We do a lot of justice, and our paralegals, are expected to rotate fairly quickly through those other sections and then, get your butt in military justice and kick it into high gear. So we tend to get a lot of experience in that realm. So yeah, they rely on that. And then also, like you were mentioning, they don't have the enlisted side experience. So when I was at Lackland, which is, our basic training is there. We have a lot of technical training schools there too. So they really relied on us enlisted to kind of, give our experience and kind of lay out different cases, scenarios for them, because we had a lot of BMT cases and tech school cases. So yeah, pretty similar.
Absolutely. And it's, that you picked up all of those things from LOMC, that also goes to show that the course is effective, and especially the message that gets shared there definitely resonates as well. Teleworking essentially?
Yeah, so we can go into the shop. I can go in to do stuff to help out. But yeah, they're still, you kind of wipe your way in and wipe your way out. You got to wear masks and all that stuff. So yeah, they're trying to keep that kind of 50% thing going. But yeah, mostly teleworking. Truthfully, they'll send me stuff. I jump on my laptop and we'll knock out taskers and stuff. I know the LPO, the leading petty officer over there, pretty well. So she and I have a good relationship.
Okay. And Chief Greener, are you mostly teleworking as well?
Yeah. So I've been teleworking since basically St. Patrick's Day. We haven't been back in the office since. But being at headquarters, it's kind of like there's really not a heck of a lot we actually need to be there in person for. Part of our role with DCAP is we're supposed to travel a lot, so most of our job we need to have the ability to be remote. But this whole COVID thing kind of made us realize just how much we don't need to actually physically be there.
That's true. How's it working over there, Sergeant Graciano?
It's good. So probably for I want to say the first month and a half since March, since the whole thing happened, we were completely out of the office. The only time we would come in is if we really need to. And then we were put into Team A and Team B. So pretty much our office is split completely by expertise and personnel count. So me and my chief are on 2 separate days. So I come in to work Monday, Wednesdays, and Friday mornings, and then the other team will come in Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Friday afternoons to help eliminate the spread of COVID if it's hit our office. But yeah, we got bleach and wipes and sanitizer, and we have to wear a mask anytime we're I got mine right here. Anytime we can't keep the 6 feet distance, but on the days I'm not in, I'm teleworking, so I have a laptop I take home. So yeah, the only time I'm actually in here or actually have to be here really is to file stuff, which I'm doing right now, destroying records, and reviewing ROTs, any hard copy stuff that I have to review. So.
Yeah, we've been teleworking to some great success, really. It's crazy how you realize how many things you can actually accomplish remotely. And then that's
you don't have the phone ringing all the time.
That's right. And they have to find new innovative ways to reach out to us. And innovation is just kicking in tremendously since COVID-19 hit, and we've been forced to to telework. Right? A lot of new ideas, a lot of new initiatives have happened. because of this. So it has been an interesting experience and an interesting experiment for all of us, and just the capabilities that we have um, to continue being lethal. That lethality that
Right.
is so much talked about in the national defense strategy. So.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I have one more question, and essentially one more topic, and it's mainly centered around your duties and responsibilities and your life in a fleet or on a ship. So, what does that look like? Do you have? And the one question that I had is, when you're talking about military justice on a ship, is do you have? Can you do courts on a ship?
So not very often. So summary court martials, easy day. You can do those anywhere. Special and general courts martial, if they're contested, rarely would they ever occur on a ship. Most recently, we did have a general court martial held on one of our carriers while at sea, but it was a plea agreement case, so there weren't any logistics to really deal with as far as getting people on board. But there's really very limited space on any ship, let alone a carrier. I mean, carrier's pretty large, but the amount of room you need for trial counsel, defense counsel, the judge, bailiff, and the accused, and all that is pretty limited. Plus, if the ship's at sea, you have the added factor of getting a military judge, because although we have a person on our ship called a judge, they're not a military judge. They're just called judge because it's short for Judge Advocate General. JAG almost was too easy. But yeah, each of our ships our carriers, each of them have a brig. Some of our amphibs have a brig. So there is an ability to put somebody in confinement. I mean, we really used that back in the day when bread and water was still around. But since then, it's not all that often we get to use them unless it's a pretrial confinement because something happened underway.
Yeah. So, my experience on the ship, we've used the brig a couple times, but it was for personnel that, like, you're underway for a long period of time, that they just won't stop. They're just, you know what, I'm not long for the Navy, and I don't really care if we do restriction and things like that, which is tough on a ship. It just is the restricted. I mean, I'm not. It's tough to be on restriction on a ship. I'm sure Chief can attest to. Like, I've never been on restriction, neither has he. But we deal with that a lot, and it ain't easy, especially underway, just because with your shift work and all that. Yeah, as far as like being in a fleet, like on a ship, we don't summaries, like Chief said. Most of our stuff that's court-martialable, that's gonna. NCIS sometimes, most of the time, is going to be involved, and then that's going to go through the local trial shop or Regional Legal Service Office, and they're going to kind of do an analysis of it and look at it, and then get with the convening authority, which, depending on who what level of court martial you're going to, either be the skipper of the ship, or it could be the carrier strike group, the admiral, if it's a general type situation, but. Yeah, our big day-to-day is NJP or Captain's Mass. We do it every week. We have disciplinary. I don't know what the Air Force has akin to what I'm about to say, but we have what we call DRB, so Disciplinary Review Board, which is it's kind of a fact-finding body that the Chief's Mess will use to address misconduct. So it's advantageous for a couple reasons, and what it is you'll usually have like a panel, which is going to be on a carrier is going to be master chiefs and senior chiefs, at least on ours, and then a chair, so there's going to be one master chief and then a couple E8s and E9s, and then honestly our CMC, our command master chief, keeps a pretty open door policy. With COVID, that changed things quite a bit on the carrier, as far as if we're going to do that and how we're going to do that, and I think that'll probably change that going forward as well. But the mess kind of comes in. They ask questions like, why this? Why did this happen? Why do you think this was a bad idea? suspect or the accused, we'll call them, is they're always read their rights. We go through all that with them before that. Then we go on to X. So that's held on Mondays. On Wednesdays, we have executive officer inquiry, which is the next step. And that's when the XO has a chat with them in the chain of command. Some XOs chat a little louder than others. Just depends what's going on in their personality. And then they make a recommendation, and it'll go up to captain's master, NJP, and then they stand with this in front of the skipper. But yeah, that's a big part of that's a weekly thing, because we're the ones that prep those packages. We're the ones that do the briefs for our department head, our 04 JAG, who's then going to take, and like I said, I've had great working relationships with my judge advocates. Our lieutenant commander takes our analysis of it and essentially goes through it, verifies it, and gives it. That's what he reads to the CO. So our work product is going directly to the commanding officer and at times the admiral. So we do that. Like I said, we brief the sailors. So we're usually the good news folks. So they have to come talk to us when they do get in trouble. Like I said, we're the conduit between the chain of command of the sailor and the process. So they'll come. We'll brief them. We'll go through their 31 Bravo rights. We'll tell them what they're accused of, what their rights are after our meeting, all that stuff, their appeal stuff. We go over everything. But that's just the job part. Life on a ship is obviously only about 50 to 60% about that job, right? So everybody on a ship's a firefighter. Every single person on a ship is a firefighter. So you do a lot of DC, damage control, force protection stuff on the bigger ships. Not everybody's involved in force protection. The smaller ships, they are. But there's that. Then there's 3M, so maintenance, which is a big. It's not as big in a legal shop, but we do a lot of that too, which is a whole separate program. It's just about upkeep of equipment. So you do what we always say in our shop. So there's like the legal side of it, and then there's a sailor with a capital S stuff that we do, and you got to be good at both. Usually, people that leave a carrier, at least in my experience, usually have a pretty. Even though you're not doing courts martial and you're not doing some of it, they have done a lot of legal assistance and they can get a good work product out in a short amount of time because they don't really have a choice. And it's a high stress environment. So especially with COVID going on now, I can tell you on the ship I came from, just kind of how that played out was fairly intense. So you just got to adapt. You still have, it's a customer service based thing, right? So you still have a client, you still have a customer base. We were still doing power of attorney for people just over the phone, come in, verify their ID, have them sign, get them out the door, because they had sick families at home and stuff they needed to take care of, right? So we have to be that continuity for the crew, and I think that we succeeded in that. Legal shops are all about that. They're all about the customer and the client. So, but yeah, that's a quick snapshot kind of what we do.
And I really like what you said about, the big S, obviously, because, you guys are sailors first, and we are airmen first, and Marines, they'll definitely tell you that they are Marines.
Yeah.
That's not even a question as to whether they're Marines or not, right? They're every Marine a rifleman. I mean, that is as simple as it gets. And then same thing with the Army, they're soldiers. But I think we're still working on this culture. But with the Air Force, it's easy to detach yourself from being an airman, just because we don't have that connection with, a lot of times we sometimes don't have that connection with the mission. Just like the Navy does if you're on a ship, right? Like, and you have to do all these duties. You're reminded every single day that you,
right,
first and foremost, you're a sailor. And same thing with the other services. But there could be some airmen that spend their whole career in the Air Force who've never touched a plane. You know what I mean? Or who never go near an airplane. And I've deployed a couple of times, so I've been on a C-130 and I've been on KC-135s and different aircraft. But so that's just one thing that it's important, I think, to still make sure that we are harping on the fact that we are airmen first. And we have an airman's creed that is. That's amazing. It reminds us that of our responsibilities as airmen. But I think it's just one thing that maybe we have to do a little bit better.
Yeah, and people tend to joke because so our professional military education, we have leadership school for, when you make different ranks. I'm sure you guys do too. So it's a joke across Air Forces, like, oh, you're going to Airman Leadership School, you're going to get re-blued. That's like you're becoming an airman again, because you kind of forgot that, like, you get so sucked into your day-to-day, paralegal job or whatever job you have in the Air Force, that you kind of forget that there's people out there working on planes and F-16s shooting down other aircraft, and there's drones out there watching these. You don't really realize that that's something that others are doing every day. So I think especially for the Air Force paralegals, it can be hard for us to kind of get that tie back to the bigger mission, just because we're not on a ship every day like you guys are. We don't have to do, that maintenance, and we don't pretty much have to keep ourselves alive out at sea. So for the most part, we have additional duties, but it's nothing like that. I mean, we clean our building here like once a month. We have equipment custodians, safety and all that stuff, but those jobs usually go up for the NCOs and stuff like that. So the younger airmen. So I always try to tell them, like, consider yourself lucky, like, appreciate everything you have right now, and don't forget that you are an airman, and there's other stuff that you need to be doing within the Air Force. So I know my last superintendent, he harped on that. He's like, you're an airman first. There's a reason why U.S. Air Force is bigger than your occupational badge on your uniform, is because you are an airman first. And we're trying to get that culture back, but it can be hard. So
yeah, I think we have it for the most part. It's just certain professions, it's hard to make that connection. And then the DRB, you mentioned LN1, the DRB. That's something that caught my interest.
Yeah,
I don't think that. Yeah, so hang on. So because we also have certain timelines, right, where NJP has to happen. You guys have that. So if someone committed an offense and you find out that someone committed an offense, that's Article 15, or I'm not sure what are some things that happen on a ship that are automatic captain mask.
Yeah, so for us, as far as timeline goes, we really stick with the MCM as far as kind of the 2-year thing goes, but it's not just about that. It has to do with it, misconduct to the previous command. That there's some you can get into the weeds a little bit on that. For us, a lot of the cases we see are going to be, drug pops. They're going to be what we call gun decking maintenance, where you signed like you did a piece of maintenance and you didn't complete it. Some assaults, things like that, but not everything necessarily warrants, because the point of military justice, right, is to maintain good order and discipline, but in a quick and efficient way, and that's the reason commanders are given the ability to do that. So on a ship, especially, you need to get stuff taken care of quickly and efficiently outside of military justice. Just for the ship never sleeps, right? It's always going. There's not, turn the office lights on and we go home. It's always going. There's night check and day check. So it's always awake. But in order to expedite the process and give the accused kind of a fair shake, because NJPs, captain's mess, those will go on your record, and that can hurt you in some ways. Certainly, if you want to go forward in your career, it's not ending, but it can hold you back for maybe some promotions later and things like that. So DRBs maybe keep things at a level where it doesn't go in your official record. It's really just a counseling. You're just being counseled by the chief's mess, usually your leadership, your khaki leadership. But there's rarely an officer allowed, or they have to be asked to be there. So the Chief Greener can probably speak to this, that there's always a curious judge advocate really wants to, I just want to see what they're doing. I just want to see what it's all about. And it's very much a chief's mess thing. The only, in all the cases that I've done, both in Sigonella for all lieutenant commands and on the ship, the only person below the rank of E7 that I've ever seen, other than a witness or accused, be allowed in is the legalman. because our role in the DRB is to kind of take notes and make sure everything's going right, but also to ensure that the accused understands why they're there and that the board understands why they are there, right? So that we kind of stay inside the lines of, okay, this is what you were read your rights for because you were UA for 2 days. We don't get into things outside of that, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think it's a very helpful tool in that it allows stuff that can maybe be handled expeditiously at a lower level to be handled, right? So it doesn't need to, the XO, busy person, commanding officer of an aircraft carrier, very busy person, right? So they don't, if you have a docket of 15 people, that means that you probably got a bigger issue going on. So try to weed some of the maybe, I don't want to say lower level, but there's some stuff that could be counseled. Try to do that at DRB and XOI. So by the time you're up to the CO, it's only misconduct that truly deserves to be there. Plus, sometimes, I hate to say it, but not everybody tells the truth all the time. So maybe some underlying facts come out at DRB and XOI. Some people choose not to speak at all, though. That's their right. They come in, they say, I want to invoke my 31 Bravos. I'm not going to talk. So in that case, it's usually going forward.
So again, just on the DRB, just to understand the full process. So someone commits an offense that could potentially be an Article 15 or NJP, right?
Correct.
Then they meet the next step is to meet the DRB?
So normally, yes. There's some stuff, if it's very, depending on the person, let's say they've been to captain's mast a few times, or it's for a type of misconduct. So like usually if there's, say, some assault stuff, sexual assault stuff, any domestic violence issues, things like that, that normally are handled outside of the ship anyway. But let's say for whatever reason they find themselves in there, we're probably not going to have those go to DRB and XOI. They're probably the skipper is going to sit with the chief of the legal office, with the SJA, and they're going to hash it out with the real SO on shore side. That's normally, in my chief might have had a different experience, but that's thus far over this past year, that's what I've seen. I think that's a good way forward, just because those issues are pretty sensitive. So.
Yeah, one of the ways to think about DRB is it's really about kind of not necessarily delegation of authority. It's more of empowerment to the senior enlisted. As you probably know, there are some senior enlisted that are really good at finding out or figuring out somebody's story and how it doesn't match up, or how much it does match up, or discover some other set of facts that maybe this was a small drug ring, but it's a big drug ring. But that's basically what happens down there is, we scrutinize the story, version of events that either side is telling. If the accused doesn't want to speak, okay, great. They're more than welcome to not speak, but they'll continue on, trying to find out more information. Typically, before DRB happens, there's some level of investigation that's already occurred, whether that's by the ship's security department, a preliminary inquiry officer under the JAGMAN, or maybe even NCIS for more of the serious stuff. But when it's, things that really impact the morale and performance of the ship, it's a tool to really drive home the importance of why they should not be doing whatever it is that they're accused of doing. So like the big one is like larceny. Like that is the quickest way to kill the morale in any unit, is for somebody to be stealing somebody's stuff. Another one's about lying about doing their job. Those are really the top two that aren't like violent in nature, that can really kill the morale or performance of a unit. So the chief's mess will go and figure out those facts, and under certain circumstances, the commanding officer might delegate to the command master chief to handle those cases with either extra military instruction, or allow the command master chief to make a recommendation for a particular punishment. That, of course, goes to the executive officer and then to the commanding officer, with the commanding officer making the full decision. There have been times where the the command master chief says, hey, I want to handle this at my level, but the commanding officer insists, no, it's still coming to me. Send me whatever you found out. And the command master chief standing next to the CEO at Captain's Mast and will typically tell him what happened at DRB. So it's pretty unique to the Navy. It's really just driven by efficiencies. The Marines have things that are similar, but they're also a lot more boisterous, I guess might be a good word for it. But yeah, there's similarities in each of the services, but I think the DRB is really one thing that's pretty unique to the Navy.
Absolutely. Well, that's, I think, all the questions that I had. I'm not sure if Sergeant Graciano, do you have anything additional?
I had one, but I don't want it to take up too much time. I know we're all working through this post MJ16 new UCMJ rewrite thing. I know it's taken a toll on our processes and procedures. For the most part, I think we've got it pretty figured out, but I was wondering how it has impacted, maybe some of the senior legalmen in your branch, or because I know for us, it was like, oh my gosh, I knew my job. Now I have to relearn my job. But yeah, so how has it impacted you all?
Did you want to go first?
So truthfully, I can only speak from my experience. It hasn't, because the ship concentrates because of our kind of limitations on the ship. A lot of the MJ16 stuff was, for us, it was very courts-martial heavy, and how those are processed. And as Chief alluded to before, we don't do a ton of those. So for us, bread and water, because people love to threaten that. I don't want to say threaten, but bring that one up, hey, you get to do this, bread and water it is. That went away. But for the ship going piece of the rate, not huge differences. Chief, because of his experience on the trial side right now, can probably speak more to big changes that they've seen as far as post trial and that stuff goes. But for us, not in a huge way. There has been some, certainly the reorganization of the articles and some of the addition of that, particularly because where we're at right now with the COVID thing. Article 84 is one that you might hear about some more, which wasn't even really, it's new, right? And it just came out just in time, I guess. But yeah, we don't do a ton of the trial stuff, so I can only speak to just our viewpoint. It hasn't changed a ton, other than relearning how to charge things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would kind of echo the same. I mean, military justice can be a pretty perishable skill. And when it changes and you haven't been doing it for a while, I mean, it's hard to forget what you already knew. We do a certain amount of refresher type stuff for people that are coming back into the community, the military justice community, litigation community, I should say. Pretty much just to re-explain, the changes in pre and post trial processes, the creation of the no BCD special court martial, which we all have a nickname for, but we're not allowed to say. But it's just really about reminding people. I mean, you'll still catch people every now and then saying PTA instead of plea agreement, and then you just kind of nudge hey, it's a plea agreement, and they're like, oh yeah. But overall, it hasn't been too rigorous of a change or stressful or anything like that. It's really just about paying attention to the details and just reminding each other, hey, that changed. That changed a couple of years ago. So it's not terrible, but it's not most ideal. I wish the articles had changed as much as they did, because relearning the new numbering system is interesting. The favorites are always in the same spot, like 92.
Yeah.
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 How has it affected you all? What have you, just your post-trial stuff, or?
So, so whenever it was rolling out, I was actually in the middle of coming from the defense community back into the base legal office, which is the government side. And in the defense community, you kind of get a little detached from that day-to-day processing of those procedures because you're not doing all that paperwork. You're pretty much just working on, defense theories and helping your clients through the process and all that. So when I was PCSing back, they're like, oh yeah, this MJ16 thing's rolling out. I'm like, what? I don't understand. And it was like that for many of my peers too. So we were all just kind of like, okay, blind leading the blind here. We don't know what's going on. They did have trainings that came out, but I think until we actually were doing it and seeing it, it was really hard to understand. We kicked it off. So my office was actually the first ever to do the very first MJ16 trial for the Air Force. So I feel grateful for that. So we kind of kicked off MJ16 with that trial. So thankfully it was an easy one, plea agreement. So it kind of helped, give that buffer. All right, we know what we're doing now. But I honestly love the new process. I didn't think I was going to like it, but post-trial is so much easier now. It's so much faster. It's efficient. It makes a lot of sense. So at first it was a struggle, just trying to, they're still rolling out with like guidance memorandums, changing the AFIs, the instructions to kind of help us work through all the different kinks. But at first it was a struggle, but now being, a year and a half in, it's pretty good. I like it.
Well, this was awesome. I learned so much about the Navy right now. And
Yeah.
I know that, and well, not just the Navy in general, but obviously about the Navy legalmen rates and that, for our lingo, the career field and how you do things. And I don't know, maybe we can look at some of those practices and see, I don't know if something about an idea.
I love that DRB thing. We would do so much less 15s if we had a DRB.
That's
Right.
right.
It
And
really
just
does help weed them out.
It does.
and just the involvement of the enlisted force in that process, I think is really important. I think in the Air Force is very officer heavy. I mean, there's a first sergeant who's kind of in the middle of it all, as far as the liaison between the legal office and the commander. But really, it's typically an officer heavy process. So I like involving the enlisted and the senior NCOs in that process to kind of talk and make those type of recommendations. So, but yeah, no, we learned a lot, and I definitely want to thank all three of you for the flexibility. We went kind of long on this chat, but it was definitely productive and informative. And if there's anything else that we missed as far as the Air Force, we could certainly do part 2 at some other time.
I might take you up on that.
Yeah.
That's right. If there's any other information that left out, and I can also get some other facts, because I know I was kind of I've been out of the career field, so I was a PME instructor for 3.5 years, and I just got back about 3 months ago into the career field. So there might be, and I knew a lot of things, but then you kind of tend to forget, and there's a lot of things that, so I'll make sure that we get those facts straight as far as the retraining process and everything, and the timelines for that as well. But thank you. Yeah, thank you for
thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.